Now, there's been a major change in the UK government's approach to tracing people using a smartphone, an app developed by the NHS. Ministers have now decided that the app, which has been trialled on the Isle of Wight, is now going to use technology provided by Apple and Google. The original aim was to get the app up and running by mid-May, but there's still no date for its full operation, as our health editor Hugh reports.
All eyes were on the Isle of Wight for the trial of a smartphone app. It was set to go live across England in May to help trace people who'd been in contact with those who tested positive for coronavirus. There was even an official publicity video.
The NHS COVID-19 app lets you know quickly if you've come into contact with someone who has symptoms.
But technical issues were revealed in the trial. It proved not to be effective on all devices. A parallel trial with an app provided by Apple and Google was being carried out elsewhere. Now the NHS will work with the companies to develop a new design using data gathered from both projects.
You had said that the smartphone app would play a central role in testing and tracing. It's now been delayed. When do you think the app will be involved in identifying and tracing contacts?
We are working on it, is the answer. We're not going to put a date on it, I'm afraid, because I'm absolutely determined that whilst this technology can help, it's got to be working effectively.
Very different from what was said to Isle of Wight residents last month.
I have a simple message. Please download the app to protect the NHS and save lives.
It now won't be launched till the autumn at the earliest, perhaps only for booking tests and reporting symptoms, and possibly never for full contact tracing. The focus now will be on human tracing. If someone tests positive, they'll get an email or phone call asking for details of people they've recently met up with. Since it was launched in England in late May, details of more than 14,000 people who tested positive were put into the system. Of those, around 10,200 were reached and asked to provide contacts, just under three-quarters of the total.
As lockdown has eased, the amount of calls that I've seen sort of over the last few days have increased in terms of the amount of contacts that they're giving me. So, for example, previously I might have had only, let's say, 3 or 4 people that they've actually been in close contact with. That's now doubled to maybe 7 or 8.
But some others who have to follow up the contacts and wish to remain anonymous say they've had little to do.
I went live on the 30th of May. In that time, I have dialed 2 numbers and they were both no answer. I've had no other calls since then.
You've been identified as a close contact of someone who has COVID.
In Scotland, more than 1,200 contacts were traced between late May and mid-June. As in England, this will be the way forward for now, rather than with smartphone technology. Hugh, BBC News.
The lockdowns in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland are being eased. In a moment, we'll get more details from Sarah Smith in Glasgow and Hywel Griffith in Cardiff. But first, let's join Emma Vardy in Belfast for the latest there.
Well, today, Northern Ireland became the first part of the UK to make a major change to the social distancing rules. The Stormont executive announced that for children in schools, social distancing could change from 2 metres to 1 metre. Now, this is something that some teachers have been calling for a while, saying in some classrooms 2 metres wasn't very realistic. And the idea is by changing this, it will allow full classes of children here in Northern Ireland to return when the schools reopen at the end of August. But that social distancing rule, it will remain 2 metres for adults. Now, another much anticipated announcement today on hairdressers. They, along with barbers and beauty salons, will be able to reopen in Northern Ireland from July the 6th, as long as they have some safety measures in place. And another piece of news today for people who've been shielding all of this time. The devolved government said today that shielding can pause from July the 31st, and people this will affect will be receiving letters to say this. But of course, all of this is conditional on transmission of the virus remaining low.
Scotland's coming out of lockdown at a slower and more cautious pace than the rest of the UK. From tomorrow, a total of 3 households will be allowed to meet up as long as they're outside and with a maximum of 8 people. And couples who live apart, as long as one of them lives alone or with children, will be allowed to meet indoors and they will be permitted to stay overnight. Most shops are going to be allowed to reopen, but not until the 29th of June, and not including shops that are inside indoor shopping centres. And face masks are going to be compulsory on public transport from Monday, and possibly inside shops when they reopen at the end of the month. And I think it's fair to say there's been a degree of disappointment across Scotland that bars and restaurants which have outdoor space aren't going to be allowed to reopen just yet. But the Scottish Government say there is emerging evidence that they can be hotspots for the transmission of the virus. And Nicola Sturgeon is making no apologies about taking a more cautious pace than the rest of the UK. She has always said when it comes to this crisis, she's taking no unnecessary risks.
It's more than 12 weeks now since the shops here in Cardiff were told to close. Tomorrow, we understand they'll be told formally that they can reopen from Monday, provided that they've got the right safety measures in place. Now, they were told about 3 weeks ago that they could start to prepare, but the Welsh Government has never given definitive dates. It says its decisions have been based on data. And the key bit of data here in Wales is that the R number, the transmission rate of the virus, is down to 0.7. However, we understand that one other major limitation, the 5-mile limit on non-essential journeys, will remain in place for a couple of weeks. So that means people outside Cardiff can't come shopping here next week, and perhaps more importantly, people who live a little further away from their loved ones still won't be able to meet up for a couple of weeks. One date that we do have here in Wales is when all year groups return to school. That's on June the 29th. It was meant to be the start of a 4-week catch-up period that included an extra week for summer term. However, tonight the Welsh Government says it'll now be up to councils and schools whether or not they offer that extra week following pressure from unions.
Hywel, many thanks again. Hywel Griffith there for us in Cardiff, and Sarah Smith in Glasgow, Emma Vardy in Belfast.